Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a version of Christmas that feels familiar at first glance. But the longer you stay there, the more you realise you probably won't survive this. Not because of dragons or wars or anything cinematic like that, but because winter itself is the enemy. And Christmas in the Middle Ages exists right in the middle of its most brutal stretch. Before we go any further, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval village in late December, and the first thing you notice is how dark everything feels. Not just cozy dark, actual heavy darkness. The sun barely lifts itself above the horizon, and when it does, it feels weak, like it's apologising for not staying longer. Houses leak smoke through thatched roofs, the air smells like damp wood and animals, and the cold doesn't politely stay outside. It creeps into your bones. Christmas for you isn't about warmth yet, it's about survival. Here's a solid historical fact to anchor you. By the High Middle Ages, December 25th is firmly established across Christian Europe as the celebration of Christ's birth, but nobody agrees exactly when Jesus was born. The date is symbolic, layered deliberately onto older Roman and pagan winter festivals that already marked the turning of the year. You're not just celebrating a birthday, you're participating in a cosmic argument about light versus darkness. And in a world where most people work outside and live close to starvation, that argument feels very real. Advent has already been going on for weeks by the time you arrive. This is not the Advent calendar version with chocolates and twinkly anticipation. Advent is a season of waiting, fasting and restraint. In many regions, you're expected to limit meat, sex, and excessive celebration. Think Lent, but colder and darker. The idea is spiritual preparation, but practically, it also stretches food stores. Scholars still debate how strictly these rules were enforced among peasants versus preached from pulpits. Some argue Advent discipline was idealised more than practiced. Others point to church records showing real penalties. You feel that tension everywhere, between what people are told to do and what they actually can endure. The village itself seems hushed, but not peaceful. Dogs bark, bells toll in the distance, and those bells matter more than you might expect. Church bells are the loudest, most authoritative tones in your world. They mark time, summon prayer, warn of danger, and on Christmas Eve they signal something enormous. You made it. You survived the darkest stretch of the year so far. There's a quirky fringe belief floating around too. Some people swear that at midnight on Christmas, church bells can drive away demons hiding in the countryside. Not metaphorical demons, actual ones. You don't laugh, because plenty of people here genuinely believe the night is thin, fragile, and full of things watching. As evening settles in, you prepare for midnight mass. This is the centrepiece of Christmas, not the morning with gifts. You walk across frozen ground toward the church, breath fogging in front of you. Inside it's dim, crowded, and cold. Stone walls hold on to winter like they're hoarding it. There are no padded pews, no heating, and you'll likely be standing for hours. And yet, the church is full. Attendance is not optional in the social sense, even if enforcement varies. Christmas is one of the few moments where heaven feels close enough to touch, if only because the alternative, the endless dark, is unbearable. A curious historical detail. In some regions, animals were believed to kneel at midnight on Christmas to honour Christ's birth. Cows, oxen, sheep, everyone swears their uncle saw it once. This belief pops up across Europe and no one seems embarrassed by it. In fact, scholars still debate whether these stories were symbolic teaching tools or sincerely held folk beliefs that blended Christianity with older rural traditions. Standing there, listening to Latin you don't understand, you realise something important: faith. Here is not abstract theology. It's practical. It's a framework for making winter survivable. The smell inside the church is a mix of damp wool, candle wax, and unwashed bodies. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a prayer. You feel tired in a deep way modern exhaustion doesn't quite match. Sleep comes and goes unpredictably in winter, dictated by daylight and cold. Christmas is meant to reset something inside you, to promise that the light will come back. That's why the timing matters so much. Even scholars who argue against pagan continuity Admit the symbolism is impossible to ignore. Christmas sits right at the hinge of the year. There's also anxiety in the air. Confession matters more now. Dying in winter is common, and dying in sin is terrifying. Hell is vivid in medieval imagination, physical, eternal, and crowded. Christmas isn't just joy, it's insurance. You participate not because it's cozy, but because the stakes feel eternal. As Mass ends and people spill back into the cold, there's relief, but not relaxation. The 12 days of Christmas are about to begin, but tonight is still serious. You head home knowing tomorrow will bring food, noise, and temporary release. But for now, you're aware of how thin the line is between celebration and despair. Christmas has arrived, yes, but winter hasn't loosened its grip, not yet. And as you lie down, wrapped in wool that never quite feels dry, you sense what Christmas really is here. A promise whispered into the longest night. Fragile, hard-earned, and absolutely necessary. You wake up on Christmas morning not to excitement, but to silence. The kind of silence that only exists when snow has fallen overnight and muffled the world. Your breath fogs the air even indoors, and before anything else, before food, before greetings, you pray. That's not optional. Christmas Day begins with God because in your mind He is the reason you made it through the night. Advent is technically over now, but its weight still lingers in your body. You've been waiting for this day for weeks, and yet it doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, stiff with cold joints and stiff expectations. Advent for you has not been a countdown of anticipation, but a test of endurance. Historically speaking, Advent in the Middle Ages varied wildly depending on region and century. In some places it lasted 4 weeks, in others up to 6. What stayed consistent was the idea of restraint. Meat was limited, feasts postponed, celebrations muted. There's scholarly debate about how harsh Advent really was for everyday people. Some historians argue that the Church promoted strict fasting ideals that few could afford to follow, while others point to monastic records and sermons that suggest real compliance. Especially when social pressure the enforcing. From where you're standing, the truth feels muddy. You know people bent the rules, but you also know hunger isn't theoretical. Here's the thing modern Christmas often forgets. Anticipation only feels sweet when deprivation is real. By the time Christmas arrives, your body is craving calories, warmth, and relief. That's why today matters so much. The promise isn't abstract joy, it's tangible nourishment. But before that comes another church service. Christmas Day Mass is mandatory in spirit, if not always in law. You pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday, and step back into the frozen morning. Inside the church, the mood has shifted slightly from midnight Mass, there's more light, more sound, and a cautious sense of relief. Candles burn longer, voices are louder. The priest wears brighter vestments. A historical fact worth holding on to here. Medieval liturgy treated Christmas as one of the great feasts of the year, rivaled only by Easter. That meant specific prayers, music and rituals designed to emphasize incarnation. God made flesh. In a world where flesh freezes, starves and breaks, that idea hits differently. God didn't float above suffering. He entered it. That matters to you in ways theology textbooks can't capture. There's also a strange, persistent belief whispering through the village today, that the world itself pauses for Christmas. Some say water turns briefly to wine at midnight. Others swear bees hum hymns in their hives. Particularly stubborn folk belief insists that animals can speak human language on Christmas night, but listening to them is dangerous. You'll either hear a prophecy of your death or be struck dead for overhearing divine secrets. Scholars still argue whether these stories were meant as moral warnings, or if people genuinely stayed awake hoping to catch a whisper from the stable. Either way, no one checks the barn tonight. Tempting fate feels unwise. After church, the real reward begins. Food. Not a modern spread by any stretch, but compared to the last few weeks, it feels excessive, so bread is fresh instead of stale. There's meat, maybe pork or goose if you're lucky. Pottage thickened with extra grains. Cheese that hasn't been rationed into misery. Ale flows more freely, even before noon. This isn't gluttony for its own sake, it's practical replenishment. Bodies need calories to survive winter, and Christmas is when you're allowed, encouraged even, to restore yourself. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval Christmas feasting was as widespread as popular imagination suggests. Some historians argue Lavish feasts were limited mostly to nobles and monasteries, while peasants enjoyed only marginal improvements. Others counter that even small increases, an extra loaf, a bit of meat, would have felt enormous after weeks of restraint. Sitting here, chewing slowly, you know which side feels closer to the truth. This meal might not look impressive, but it feels like abundance. The mood loosens as the day goes on. Laughter returns in cautious bursts. Children, who don't fully grasp the theology but understand the change in routine, grow louder. There are no toys under a tree. Trees indoors aren't really a thing yet. But children might receive small treats, maybe fruit, or a simple handmade item. Childhood, as a protected stage of life, it is still a developing concept. You expect children to work, to help, to mature quickly. Christmas is one of the rare days when they're allowed to simply exist, loudly. Outside, the sky stays pale and distant. Daylight doesn't last long, but it doesn't need. 2. Something has shifted. Advent's waiting is over, and now the season stretches forward instead of pressing down. The 12 days of Christmas aren't a countdown to an end. They're an expansion, a slow unfurling of celebration, misrule, and rest. Tomorrow won't be ordinary work. Not yet. As evening comes, you feel something unfamiliar. Permission to relax. Not fully, not recklessly, but enough to breathe easier. Christmas isn't over in a day. It's just beginning. And for the first time in weeks, the dark doesn't feel quite so threatening. You start to notice that time itself feels different now. Christmas hasn't ended. It's opened something. The days between December 25th and January the 6th stretch out like a slow, glowing corridor, and you're expected to walk through all of it. This is one of the most misunderstood things about medieval Christmas. It isn't a single burst of joy followed by leftovers. It's a season, carefully structured, thick with ritual and meaning. The bells tell you this before anyone else does. Church bells dominate your world. They always have, but during Christmas they feel especially powerful, as if they're stitching heaven and earth together with sound. Historically, bells were believed to do far more than mark time. They chased away storms, demons, and disease. Some medieval theologians argued that consecrated bells physically altered the air when rung. That's not poetry, that's literal belief. When Christmas bells ring, you don't just hear celebration, you hear protection. Every day of the Christmas season has its own rhythm of services, prayers, and expectations. You attend Mass more often now, not less. Rest doesn't mean absence of devotion, it means devotion reshaped. The church calendar wraps around you like scaffolding, holding the days in place so they don't slide back into chaos. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much ordinary people understood the theology behind these rituals. Some argue that Latin liturgy created distance and confusion. Others suggest that repetition, symbolism, and storytelling created a deep embodied understanding that didn't require formal education. Standing there again, listening to familiar phrases you can't translate but still recognize, you feel that second argument might be onto something. Between services, life grows louder. Visitors arrive. Hospitality is expected, sometimes demanded. Turning someone away during Christmas is dangerous, not just socially, but spiritually. The stranger at your door might be Christ in disguise. That's not metaphorical either. Medieval sermons love that idea, and you've heard it enough times to believe it just enough to act on it. You share what you can, even when it makes you nervous. There's a quirky, half-serious belief circulating through the village that the gates of heaven are slightly more open during the 12 days. Prayers travel faster. Miracles are more likely. So are hauntings. Christmas is a thin time, people say. You don't fully know what that means, but you feel it in the way nights seem deeper, heavier, and more watched. Folklore seeps into faith here without apology. Scholars still debate where Christianity ends and older winter beliefs begin, but for you, the blend feels natural. This is how the world works. Music fills the air now, and not just in church. Songs spill into homes and streets, carried by voices that are more enthusiastic than skilled. Medieval Christmas music doesn't aim for quiet reverence. It's loud, repetitive, and communal. Everyone joins in because not joining feels wrong. A historical fact to ground you. Many popular Christmas songs of the Middle Ages were in the vernacular, not Latin, precisely so ordinary people could sing them. This wasn't passive listening, it was participation. Your voice matters, even if it cracks. Not all music is welcomed equally. There's tension between sacred and secular songs, and church authorities argue constantly about which tunes are appropriate. Some complain that bawdy melodies sneak into holy spaces, dressed up with Christian lyrics. Others shrug and say, God understands human joy. This debate never really resolves, and you can feel it when a song skirts the edge of propriety. Laughter follows, nervous and delighted. Time off work exists now, but it's uneven. If you're a peasant, animals still need feeding, fires still need tending. Christmas doesn't erase labour, it softens it. Lords often grant a few days of reduced obligations, but that generosity is strategic. A rested, well-fed workforce survives winter better. If you're noble, the pressure looks different. Hosting becomes your labour. Feasts are performances, carefully watched by rivals and allies alike. Christmas is as political as it is spiritual. There's also the looming awareness of what comes next. Twelfth Night, January the 5th or 6th, will bring something strange and potentially dangerous. Misrule. The social order is going to wobble on purpose. You can already feel the tension building. Christmas isn't just about peace, it's about controlled chaos, letting off pressure before it explodes. Scholars debate whether misrule genuinely empowered lower classes or simply reinforced hierarchy by allowing temporary rebellion. From where you stand, it feels like both. Relief and risk tangled together. As night falls, candles flicker longer than usual. You stay awake later, talking, singing, listening. Sleep comes easier now, not because the world is safer, but because you're not carrying it alone. The bells will ring again tomorrow, and the next day. Christmas isn't a moment you consume, it's a space you inhabit. By the time midnight mass comes around again, because yes, you're back here already, you've learned something important about medieval devotion. Discomfort is part of the point. You're standing on cold stone floors that seem to leach warmth straight out of your bones, wrapped in wool that smells faintly of smoke and sheep. There's no illusion that God requires comfort. If anything, effort proves sincerity. And Christmas, despite its joy, demands effort. Midnight Mass during the Christmas season isn't a one-time spectacle. In some regions, multiple nighttime services cluster around feast days, especially for those with particular devotions or obligations. Historically, church attendance spikes sharply during Christmas, and clergy often complain somewhat bitterly that people show up more reliably for feasts than for ordinary Sundays. Scholars still debate whether this reflects shallow faith or practical prioritization. Standing here, tired and aching, you suspect it's neither. It's about survival again. These nights matter. The church interior looks different in candlelight. Shadows stretch long and distorted across painted saints whose eyes seem to follow you. Medieval churches are not. Minimalist spaces. They're crowded with images, relics, smells and sounds. Incense burns thick enough to sting your nose, and there's a persistent belief, half theology, half folk wisdom, that incense confuses demons, making it harder for them to linger. You don't know if that's doctrine, but no one questions it. Better safe than sorry. A solid historical fact anchors this moment. Many medieval churches staged nativity scenes using statues or live reenactments during Christmas. These weren't cute displays for children. They were teaching tools in a largely illiterate society. Seeing Mary, Joseph, the animals, the infant Christ, it made the story tangible. In some places, people believed the statues themselves carried blessing. Touching them could bring fertility, healing, or luck. Church authorities tolerated this behaviour with mixed feelings, worried it edged too close to superstition. You understand the temptation. When warmth and health are uncertain, you grab, meaning wherever it's offered. There's also fear woven through the reverence. Christmas night is powerful, and power attracts attention. You've heard whispers that witches are more active during the 12 days, that spirits roam freely, that the dead draw closer to the living. One fringe belief claims that those who die between Christmas and Epiphany go straight to heaven, bypassing judgment entirely. It's comforting and terrifying at the same time. Scholars argue whether this belief encouraged risky behaviour or simply softened grief during winter's deadliest weeks. Either way, you notice how often people glance at one another, quietly counting who's still here. The service stretches on. You don't understand the Latin, but you understand the rhythm. Stand, kneel or steal, bow, sing. The repetition works on you like waves. Fatigue blurs the edges of thought, and in that softened state belief slips in more easily. This is one of the church's great unspoken skills, shaping, emotion through environment. Some modern scholars frame this as manipulation. Others see it as communal psychology. Right now it just feels real. When Mass finally ends, no one rushes out. People linger, exchanging murmured greetings, touching shoulders, grounding themselves in physical presence. The cold outside is waiting, but you delay it. Christmas has created a pocket of warmth that isn't entirely about temperature. Back home, sleep comes in fragments. You dream of bells, light, and animals watching you with unsettling intelligence. When you wake before dawn, it takes a moment to remember where you are. That's becoming normal. Christmas disorients time, loosens its grip. Morning brings more visitors, more food, more noise. The cold hasn't gone anywhere, but it's less sharp now, dulled by the routine celebration. You hear laughter outside, real laughter, not the careful kind. Something inside the village is thawing even if the ground stays frozen. And beneath it all, you sense it. Christmas is testing how much joy this world can safely hold before it tips into chaos. The answer isn't clear yet, but the experiment is underway. By now you've stopped thinking of Christmas as a day at all. It's a current you're moving inside, slow but persistent, carrying you forward whether you're ready or not. This is the moment you fully realise something modern calendars hide from you. Christmas has only just begun. Today marks the true opening of the 12 days, and they stretch ahead like a long exhale after weeks of holding your breath. Historically, this matters more than people remember. In the Middle Ages, December 25th is the anchor, not the climax. Work remains limited, courts often pause, rents may be delayed, and obligations soften. You're allowed, sometimes even expected, to rest. But rest doesn't mean inactivity. It means different activity. Visiting, hosting, eating, singing, watching. The village feels busier now, not quieter, because everyone is suddenly allowed to exist beyond bare necessity. There's a firm historical fact worth settling into here. Medieval law and custom recognised Christmas as a legal season, not merely a religious one. Certain contracts couldn't be enforced, some debts weren't collected. In a few regions, courts delayed hearings altogether. Scholars debate how consistently this was applied, but even uneven enforcement sends a powerful message. Time itself bends during Christmas. Authority loosens its grip just a little. Food continues to improve not because supplies magically increase, but because hoarded stores are finally unlocked. The logic is simple and grim, and if you don't eat it now, it may spoil anyway. Winter forces honesty. You taste salt more strongly in cured meat. Bread feels heavier in your hands. Ale flows daily now, not as indulgence, but as hydration safer than water. There's a quirky belief circulating that ale brewed or opened during the 12 days tastes better and brings luck. No one questions this too hard. The proof, after all, is delicious. Social boundaries soften too. You find yourself in homes you normally wouldn't enter. Hospitality overrides suspicion. Turning someone away during the 12 days risks gossip at best, and divine judgment at worst. The old sermon echoes in your mind. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Scholars argue about how sincerely this ideal was practiced, but walking through open doors again and again, you feel its weight. Christmas doesn't make people generous forever. It makes generosity temporarily unavoidable. Children become more visible now, not protected than in the modern sense, but noticed. They're louder, dirtier, more energetic and more tolerated. A fringe belief insists that children born during the 12 days are touched by special fortune, or special danger, depending on who's telling the story. Some say they'll be unusually wise. Others say they'll see spirits too, easily. No one agrees, but everyone watches them a little more closely. Childhood here is brief, but Christmas stretches it just a bit. There's also boredom creeping in, which sounds strange but matters deeply. Without constant labour, idle time opens space for mischief. Dice games appear, wrestling matches, singing that gets louder and less polite as ale disappears. The church tolerates some of this, frowns at much of it, and outright condemns a little. Scholars still debate whether medieval authorities truly feared play or simply feared losing control of it. From inside the crowd, it feels like both. Joy is welcome, but only up to a point. You hear more stories now, told by firelight, loosened by drink. Stories of past winters, of people who didn't make it. Of strange lights seen in fields on Christmas night. Of bells ringing with no hands to pull the rope. These aren't told to scare children. They're told to explain the world. Christmas sharpens memory. It's easier to talk about death when life is briefly full. And always, hovering in the background, is Epiphany. January 6th waits at the far end of the season, like a door you haven't opened yet. You know it will matter. You don't yet know how. For now, the days roll forward gently, one after another, stitched together with food, noise, prayer, and shared warmth. You fall asleep more easily tonight, not because you're safe, but because Christmas has given you permission to stop bracing for impact. Just for a little while, the hunger you carried for weeks doesn't vanish all at once. It loosens its grip slowly, reluctantly, as if it doesn't trust this sudden generosity. Feasting during Christmas in the Middle Ages isn't a single grand meal, but a series of them, spaced across days, carefully rationed even in celebration. You're eating better now, yes, but not recklessly. Every bite still carries calculation. Winter has taught you that joy without foresight is dangerous. Grounding historical fact, medieval Christmas feasts were structured around availability, not fantasy. Goose, pork, beef and fish appear depending on region and status. Nobles enjoy multiple courses, spiced wines, and imported flavours like pepper or cinnamon, status symbols as much as tastes. Peasants feast more modestly, but even an extra serving of meat or white bread marks the day as special. Scholars debate how widespread feasting truly was, but they largely agree on this. Christmas meals were measurably better than ordinary ones, and that difference mattered more than extravagance. You taste it immediately. Fat coats your mouth in a way you haven't felt in weeks. Salt burns pleasantly on your tongue. Bread feels soft instead of stubborn. You eat slower than you want to, because eating too fast can make you sick after deprivation. This isn't indulgence, it's recovery. Bodies remember famine long after food returns. Ale and wine flow more freely now, and with them comes a curious moral flexibility. Drunkenness is still a sin, officially, but Christmas blurs the edges. There's a persistent idea that joy offered to God is less dangerous than joy taken selfishly. Some even joke, half seriously, that God looks the other way during the 12 days. A quirky fringe belief claims that drinking to excess on Christmas drives away melancholy spirits that gather in winter. You don't know if that's true, but you notice people laughing more easily after the second cup. Church authorities argue about this constantly. Sermons warn against gluttony even as feast days pile up. Scholars still debate whether these warnings reflect real excess or institutional anxiety about losing moral authority during the popular celebrations. Sitting among neighbours with flushed faces and loud voices, you sense that the church is negotiating, not commanding. Christmas requires compromise. Food also reorganises social space. You sit next to people you usually wouldn't. Hierarchies soften at the table, even if they don't disappear. Sharing food creates obligation. If someone feeds you, you owe them. Respect, loyalty, future help. Christmas generosity is not free-floating kindness, it's social glue. You feel it tightening around you with every shared dish. Children hover close to the table now, hoping for scraps, sweets, or stories. Sugar is rare, expensive and medicinal, more than recreational. If sweets appear at all, they're honeyed fruits or spiced cakes. They're memorable enough to be talked about for years. Childhood memory here isn't built from abundance, it's built from contrast. Christmas stands out sharply against the rest of the year. As the meal winds down, games begin, dice rattle on wooden tables. Someone produces a worn deck of cards. Gambling is officially frowned upon, especially during holy seasons, but Christmas makes room for contradiction. A scholarly debate lingers here too. Were games tolerated as pressure, valves, or did authorities simply fail to suppress them? From where you sit, watching coins change hands and tempers flare, it feels like both answers are true at once. Night deepens and the fire burns lower. You feel full, not just fed, but weighted, grounded. For once, your body isn't screaming for more. That sensation alone feels miraculous. Christmas has done something practical. It has reminded you what enough feels like. And that, you realise as sleep pulls you under, might be the most sacred gift of all. The line between celebration and sin grows thinner now, and you can feel everyone testing it with cautious curiosity. Alcohol sits right at the centre of that tension. Ale, wine, and mead are no longer occasional comforts. They're daily companions throughout Christmas. Not because people are chasing oblivion, but because drink is woven into medieval survival. Clean water is unreliable in winter, and fermentation is safer. Christmas simply loosens the leash. A firm historical fact grounds this scene. Medieval people drank alcohol at nearly every meal, including breakfast, but Christmas increased both quantity and strength. Special brews were prepared in advance for the season, sometimes spiced or sweetened, marking them as festive. Monasteries in particular were famous for their Christmas ales, and records show increased allotments for monks during the 12 days. Scholars debate whether this reflects indulgence or institutional morale management. You suspect it's both. With drink comes laughter and volume. Conversations stretch longer, stories grow less precise, and old grievances wobble closer to the surface. Christmas doesn't erase conflict, it softens the edges enough for it to leak out sideways. You hear jokes that would normally be risky. You hear truths disguised as humour. Someone sings off key and no one stops them. The village feels looser, less guarded. There's a curious belief floating around that becoming drunk during Christmas isn't quite the same as becoming drunk at other times of year. Some argue, only half joking, that joy itself is a form of devotion, and that refusing celebration is the greater sin. Others counter with warnings about demons slipping into people who lower their guard. This debate never resolves, but it plays out nightly in raised cups and raised eyebrows. You notice how alcohol reshapes power. A labourer speaks more boldly to a landholder. A woman laughs louder than usual. A young man challenges someone stronger than him to a contest he probably can't win. Christmas creates moments where the social script stutters. Scholars argue whether these moments meaningfully challenged hierarchy or merely reinforced it by allowing controlled release. Watching someone get gently but firmly put back in their place, you suspect the release has limits. The Church's relationship with drink is complicated. Wine is sacred. Drunkenness is sinful. Christmas lives right in this contradiction. Sermons warn against excess, but priests drink too. Everyone knows it. This shared hypocrisy doesn't feel cynical, it feels human. Christmas allows imperfection to breathe. There's also fear woven into the laughter. Fights break out more often during the season. Accidents happen. Someone falls into a fire. Someone wanders into the cold and doesn't come back. Winter doesn't forgive mistakes, and alcohol makes mistakes easier. That's why Christmas joy always carries a shadow. You feel it in the way people keep counting heads, making sure everyone is still present. As the night winds down, the ale slows. Not because supplies run out, but because bodies do. Sleep comes heavy and dreamless. You wake with a dull ache behind your eyes and a dry mouth, but also with a sense of shared experience. Everyone hurts a little. Everyone laughed a little. Christmas has bound you together through excess and recovery alike. And somewhere beneath the headache, you feel gratitude, not just for the drink, but for the permission to forget, briefly, how hard the rest of the year is. By the 8th day, you can feel the season tipping. What began as relief is starting to edge towards something riskier. This is when the figure everyone has been half joking about finally steps into the open, the Lord of Misrule. You may call him by different names depending on where you are, the Abbot of Unreason, the Prince of Fools, but the role is the same. For a short time, order bends, and someone inappropriate is placed in charge of celebration. Here's a clear historical fact. Records from England, France, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire show that Lords of Misrule were officially appointed during Christmas festivities, especially in noble households, universities, and towns. Sometimes they were servants, sometimes students, sometimes clergy of the lowest rank. Their job was to organise games, feasts, and entertainments, and to deliberately mock authority. Scholars still debate whether this tradition acted as a safety valve for social tension or subtly reinforced hierarchy by proving that chaos was only tolerable when temporary. From your position inside the season, it feels dangerous and exhilarating at the same time. The Lord of Misrule wears ridiculous clothing, exaggerated symbols of power, and issues mock commands that everyone pretends to obey. Laughter comes easily, but it isn't entirely comfortable. Jokes cut closer now. Parodies of sermons, courts, and noble behaviour sting because they're recognisable. Christmas has given people permission to say what they normally swallow. Games become louder and more physical. Wrestling, mock trials, and role reversals fill the evenings. A servant may sentence a master to drink. A peasant may mock a priest's accent or gestures. Everyone knows the rules will snap back into place soon, which is precisely why this moment matters. Scholars argue whether participants truly felt empowered or simply rehearsed obedience by temporarily inverting it. Watching the laughter falter just slightly at certain jokes, you realise both interpretations coexist. There's also an undercurrent of anxiety. Misrule flirts with blasphemy. Church authorities often tolerated it reluctantly, drawing lines that were constantly tested. Some bishops outright banned certain festivities after things went too far. Nudity in churches, obscene songs, mock masses. You've heard stories of years when misrule ended in arrests or violence. Christmas isn't always gentle. A fringe belief clings to this chaos, that letting disorder surface now prevents worse disaster later. If you don't give winter its madness, it will take something from you instead. No one writes this down as theology, but everyone seems to act as if it's true. The season feels like a negotiation with fate. As the night deepens, the Lord of Misrule raises a final toast, and the laughter crests. Tomorrow things will begin to settle. But tonight, the world is upside down, and you're very aware of how fragile right side up really is. After the noise of misrule, play doesn't stop, it sharpens. Games take over the long winter evenings now, filling the hours that work and daylight normally consume. Dice clatter on tables worn smooth by generations of hands. Boards are scratched into wood. Cards pass from palm to palm, creased and greasy. Play is no longer just amusement, it's a way to measure luck, skill and favour in a world where all three feel painfully uncertain. Here's a solid historical fact to steady you. Medieval authorities worried obsessively about games of chance. Dice in particular were associated with gambling, violence and moral decay. Town laws regularly banned or restricted them, often unsuccessfully, especially during holy seasons. Christmas, however, complicated enforcement. Records show fines issued in January for behaviour tolerated in December. Scholars debate whether this reflects hypocrisy or strategic patience. From where you're sitting, watching coins pile and scatter, it feels like everyone knows the rules are on pause, but only briefly. You play anyway. Almost everyone does. Refusing to join can feel antisocial, even suspicious. Games pull people together in tight circles, elbows touching, breath warm with ale. Victory brings cheers, loss brings groans, and sometimes accusations. Cheating is expected, oddly enough. Catching someone cheating is half the fun. Christmas laughter grows sharper here, edged with tension. Play reveals character in ways sermons never quite manage. There's a fringe belief circulating that luck during the 12 days predicts the coming year. Win at dice now, and fortune will follow you into spring. Lose badly and you might start paying closer attention to omens. Scholars argue whether this belief genuinely shaped behaviour or simply offered narrative comfort. But you notice people changing. Strategies, whispering prayers before rolling, kissing coins for luck. Rational or not, hope needs somewhere to land. Children watch these games with wide eyes. They are not always allowed to play, but they absorb everything, the gestures, the risks, the reactions. Childhood learning here isn't abstract, it's observational. Christmas is when they see adults relaxed enough to reveal how the world really works. Moral panic simmers just beneath the surface. Priests warn that gambling invites the devil, that chance undermines God's providence. And yet the same priests sometimes join the games. This contradiction doesn't cause scandal, it causes knowing smiles. Christmas exposes the gap between ideal behaviour and lived reality. Scholars still argue whether medieval society was deeply hypocritical or pragmatically flexible. Sitting here, watching moral lines blur without breaking, you suspect flexibility kept things functioning. As the night winds down, tempers cool, coins are pocketed. Games dissolve into conversation. No one talks about who won or lost anymore. What mattered was the shared risk, the shared attention, the sense that for a few hours, fate could be negotiated across a table. You head to sleep feeling mentally tired in a way work never quite causes. Play has a cost too, but it's a cost willingly paid. Christmas isn't just about rest. It's about testing the edges of control safely before the world tightens again. If there is one thing you cannot escape now, it's sound. Christmas has filled every available space with music, and silence feels almost suspicious. Songs drift through doorways, spill into streets, echo off stone walls, and overlap until you can't tell where one ends and another begins. This isn't background ambience, it's participation. You're expected to join in loudly and imperfectly. Here's a grounding historical fact. Medieval Christmas music existed in multiple layers. Plain chant dominated church services, but outside vernacular carols flourished. Many were call and response designed specifically for communal singing. Scholars agree that Christmas was one of the few times of year when music moved freely between sacred and secular spaces. This blending worried some clergy, who feared that worldly melodies diluted holy meaning. Others embraced it, arguing that joy itself was a form of praise. Standing among voices rising in uneven harmony, you understand why the debate never settled. The songs themselves are repetitive, rhythmic, and surprisingly earthy. Lyrics celebrate Christ's birth, yes, but also food, drink, winter survival, and good fortune. Some songs flirt with humour that borders on irreverent. Laughter punctuates verses. The point isn't perfection, it's volume. Sound is protection. There's an old belief that music keeps winter spirits at bay, that shunts invites misfortune. No one states this as doctrine, but no one risks quiet either. Children learn these songs early, absorbing melody before meaning. Music is memory here. Long after sermons fade, tunes stick. Scholars argue that this made music one of the most effective tools of medieval religious education. From inside the crowd, it feels less strategic and more instinctive. Singing together feels like proof you still belong. Not all music is welcome. Instruments like drums and bagpipes provoke debate. Some consider them too wild, too bodily. Others insist they're essential to celebration. You hear them anyway, pulsing beneath voices, pulling people into more movement. Dancing happens, unofficially. Feet tap, bodies sway. Christmas permits motion that ordinary days suppress. There's also an undercurrent of competition. Groups try to outsing one another. Households boast about their singers. Reputation attaches itself to sound. A good voice is a social asset. A bad one is forgiven, but remembered. Music, like everything else this season, binds and exposes. As night falls, songs soften but don't stop. Someone hums while stirring a pot. Someone else sings quietly while mending. Christmas music doesn't demand attention, it insists on presence. Even alone, you find yourself humming without realizing it. And as sleep creeps in, the melodies follow you. Sound has stitched itself into the season, and through it, into you. By now, you've started noticing the quiet anxiety that underpins generosity. Christmas gifts appear, not piled under a tree, not wrapped in paper, but passed hand to hand with meaning attached. Giving is expected, but it's never simple. Every gift carries weight, obligation, and memory. You don't give to delight. You give to secure relationships in a world that doesn't forgive isolation. Here's a clear historical fact. Medieval gift-giving at Christmas was far more common among social equals or from lower to higher status than the other way around. Peasants gave to lords, tenants gave to landlords, clients gave to patrons. These gifts weren't bribes exactly, but they weren't free either. Scholars debate whether Christmas gifts reinforced hierarchy or softened it. From where you stand, offering something you can barely spare. It feels like both. The gifts themselves are practical. Food, candles, cloth, small tools, sometimes labour, promised in advance. Luxuries are rare. Even among nobles, gifts serve political purpose. Tokens of loyalty, reminders of obligation. Christmas is a ledger as much as a celebration. You feel it when you accept a gift too. Gratitude carries a future cost. There's a fringe belief floating around that refusing a Christmas gift invites bad luck for the coming year. Even if you don't believe it fully, you don't test it. You accept, you thank, you remember, and Maria's currency here. Forgetting a gift is an insult. Forgetting to give one can be dangerous. Children experience gifts differently. A small object, a carved toy, a sweet, a piece of coloured cloth can feel miraculous. These items are kept, repaired, cherished for years. Christmas memories cling to objects long after the season ends. Scholars argue that this object-based memory shaped medieval emotional life more than abstract nostalgia. Watching a child clutch something new with fierce attention, you believe it. St. Nicholas enters the conversation more often now. Not the red-suited figure you might expect, but a bishop, a miracle worker, a watcher. In some regions he brings gifts. In others, he brings judgment. Stories of St. Nicholas rescuing children, punishing liars, and appearing unexpectedly circulate freely. He's not cosy, he's unpredictable. Christmas figures aren't meant to soothe, they're meant to enforce moral order. As gifts circulate, social tension flares quietly. Who gave more? Who gave less? Who gave nothing at all? Christmas doesn't erase inequality, it highlights it. Generosity becomes visible, measurable. Scholars still debate whether this visibility promoted charity or resentment. Sitting among exchange tokens and careful smiles, you suspect it did both. When night falls, you inventory what you've gained. Not just objects, but debts. Christmas has bound you tighter to your community. That's the point. Survival here isn't individual, it's relational. And as sleep finds you, you realise that giving, in this world, is never just about kindness. It's about staying woven into the fabric that keeps you alive. The names and stories shifting through the season begin to feel less stable now, as if Christmas itself is wearing different faces, depending on who's telling the tale. St. Nicholas is only one of them. He doesn't arrive alone. He's accompanied, sometimes followed, sometimes chased, by stranger figures who feel older, darker, and less interested in being liked. Here's a grounding historical fact. St. Nicholas of Myra was widely venerated across medieval Europe by the 12th century, especially as a soul, protector of children, sailors, and the poor. His feast day, December 6th, often carried more gift-giving weight than Christmas itself in many regions. Over time, his stories merged with local folklore, producing wildly different versions of the same saint. Scholars still debate how much of this blending was intentional Christian adaptation versus organic folk resistance. Standing here, listening to the conflicting stories, it feels like neither side have fully won. In some places, Nicholas rewards obedient children with small gifts, nuts, fruit, coins. In others, he's accompanied by a punishing counterpart, a horned figure, a wild man, something furred and rattling chains. These companions don't smile, they threaten. They remind children that Christmas joy comes with rules. You notice how effective this is. Fear teaches faster than gentleness. Childhood innocence here is not preserved, it's managed. Adults aren't immune to these stories either. There's an uneasy sense that Christmas visitors are watching, doors are locked more carefully, candles are kept burning. A fringe belief insists that supernatural beings, saints, spirits, or worse, travel freely during the 12 days, testing households for hospitality and order. Offer warmth and generosity, and you'll be blessed. Fail, and misfortune follows. Scholars debate whether this belief encouraged charity or simply reinforced anxiety. From inside the season, it feels like both. You hear stories of St. Nicholas appearing in disguise, testing people's generosity. You hear others where he punishes greed harshly, sometimes fatally. These aren't children's stories softened by distance. They are moral warnings sharpened by proximity. Christmas isn't sentimental here. It's corrective. There's also debate, open, ongoing, about whether these darker elements dilute Christian joy or deepen it. Some clergy argue that fear has no place in the celebration of Christ's birth. Others insist that discipline prepares the soul for grace. The argument echoes through sermons and fireside conversations alike. No one resolves it. Christmas holds both. As night settles, the world feels watched again. Not by warmth alone, but by expectation. You behave a little better than usual. Not out of cheer, but caution. In this world, joy is precious enough to protect with fear if necessary. And as sleep takes you, you understand something quietly unsettling. Medieval Christmas doesn't promise comfort. It promises order, enforced by saints, stories, and the ever-present risk of consequence. Christmas looks different depending on where you stand, and now you're standing firmly among the peasants, the majority of people living this season. There's no illusion here that Christmas erases work. It pauses some of it, delays some of it, softens its edges, but tomorrow still exists. Fields may be frozen, but animals still need feeding, fires still need tending, and hunger never fully leaves the room. Here's a grounding historical fact. For medieval peasants, Christmas was one of the few guaranteed breaks in the agricultural calendar. Manorial records show reduced labour obligations during the 12 days, sometimes explicitly written into contracts. Scholars debate how generous these breaks truly were, but even a partial pause mattered enormously in a life governed by relentless physical demand. From where you're standing, that pause feels like mercy, not leisure. Homes are small, crowded and busy. Christmas doesn't bring privacy. It brings people closer together, sometimes uncomfortably so. Extended family members visit if roads allow, neighbours drop in without warning. Hospitality isn't optional. Turning someone away during Christmas marks you as dangerous, selfish or cursed. You rearrange sleeping spaces, share blankets, and accept the discomfort as part of the season's cost. Food here is simpler than what you've glimpsed in noble halls, but the improvement is still real. Extra bread, a bit of meat, better ale. The contrast matters more than the quantity. Children notice it first. They hover closer to the table, quieter than usual, eyes tracking every movement of food. Christmas teaches them what enough looks like, even if only briefly. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether peasants experience Christmas primarily as relief or as heightened anxiety. Some historians argue that the season intensified pressure, more mouths to feed, more expectations to meet. Others insist the social protections of Christmas offset these strains. Sitting among flickering firelight and shared bowls, you realise both interpretations are true at once. Relief and worry coexist easily here. Folklore takes stronger hold in peasant households. Stories of spirits, omens, and protective rituals multiply. You might leave bread out overnight for wandering souls. You might avoid sweeping on certain days to prevent sweeping luck. Away. These practices aren't written down, but they're taken seriously. Christmas is dangerous enough to require extra caution. Faith here is practical, not abstract. You pray for survival, not enlightenment. You attend church because it binds the community, because absence is noticed, because God feels closer in winter. Christmas reinforces this closeness, not through comfort, but through shared endurance. As night falls, exhaustion settles in. You sleep deeply, tangled among family and neighbours, listening to breathing and the occasional crack of the fire. Christmas hasn't made life easy, it's made it briefly bearable, and for a peasant in winter, that difference means everything. When you step into the world of nobles at Christmas, the contrast is immediate and unsettling. There's warmth here, real warmth, held inside thick stone walls and fed by multiple fires. Light lingers longer, reflected off polished metal, coloured glass and rich fabric. Food is abundant, enough to become theatrical. And yet, despite all this excess, you sense tension humming beneath the surface. Christmas for nobles is not rest, it's performance. Here's a solid historical fact to ground you. Medieval noble households were expected to hold open house during Christmas, feeding not only family and retainers, but visitors, petitioners, and the poor. Household accounts from England and France show food consumption multiplying several times over during the 12 days. Scholars debate whether this generosity stemmed from genuine charity or political necessity. Standing here, watching who is welcomed and who is watched, it feels unmistakably strategic. Feasts stretch for hours, courses arrive in waves, roasted meats, spiced sauces, bread sculpted into decorative forms. Sugar and spices appear not just for flavour but for display. These ingredients travel far and cost dearly. Their presence says something clear. We have power over distance. You eat well, but you also eat under observation. Where you sit, what you're served, how much you're offered, everything communicates rank. Entertainment fills the evenings. Minstrels perform, jesters push boundaries carefully, testing how much truth they can smuggle inside jokes. The Lord of Misrule often operates most elaborately here, staging mock courts and exaggerated rituals. Scholars argue whether nobles enjoyed these inversions sincerely or tolerated them as controlled release. Watching laughter freeze just slightly when a joke cuts too close. You sense how narrow the safe path really is. There's also politics. Quiet, constant, unavoidable. Christmas truces are proposed, marriages discussed, alliances reaffirmed. Noble Christmas gatherings function as informal summits. The appearance of harmony matters more than harmony itself. Disputes are paused, not resolved. Everyone is counting days until normal power games resume. Religion remains central, but even devotion is layered with display. Nobles attend Mass in privileged spaces, closer to the altar. They endow churches generously during Christmas, not only for piety, but for legacy. Gifts to monasteries and priests are remembered. Salvation here is something you can invest in. Children of noble households experience Christmas differently too. They receive gifts meant to shape them: books, weapons, fine clothing. Play exists, but it's guided. Even joy is instructional. Scholars debate whether noble childhoods were more protected or simply more surveilled. Watching a child praised for correct behaviour rather than happiness, you suspect the latter. As night falls, the hall quiets slowly. Fires burn low. Servants move softly. You feel full but not relaxed. Christmas here has offered abundance without ease. Power never sleeps, not even in holy seasons. And as you retreat from the light and heat, you realise something quietly ironic. For all this wealth, Christmas feels heavier here than it did among the poor. As Zuviko, nights stretch on. Christmas begins to feel less human and more cosmic. The cold sharpens, the sky clears, stars burn brighter than you remember, and people start watching them with intent. This is when animals, omens, and the non-human world step closer, invited in by the strange stillness of winter. You hear it first as a joke, someone muttering that the cows are restless tonight, but the idea sticks. There's a deeply rooted belief across medieval Europe that animals recognise the significance of Christmas in ways humans no longer can. Here's a firm historical fact. Medieval sermons, bestiaires, and folk traditions repeatedly claim that animals acknowledge Christ's birth, often kneeling or behaving reverently at midnight. This belief appears in multiple regions independently, which has led scholars to debate whether it spread through church teaching or survived from older animistic traditions. Standing near a barn in the cold, listening to an animal shift its weight, you don't entirely dismiss it. You're warned, quietly but seriously, not to listen too closely. Persistent fringe belief insists that animals can speak human language on Christmas night, but only to foretell death or disaster. Anyone who overhears them is doomed. This belief is strong enough that people avoid barns at midnight, even when animals need checking. Practical necessity bows to superstition. Winter already brings enough death. You don't invite more by curiosity. Omens feel louder now too. A cracked loaf, a candle that won't stay lit, smoke that curls the wrong way. None of these mean much on their own, but during Christmas they accumulate significance. Scholars debate whether medieval people truly believed every sign carried meaning, or whether these interpretations emerged after events occurred. From your position inside the season, it doesn't matter. Meaning is retroactive and preventive at the same time. You notice everything. The weather itself is read like scripture. Snow on Christmas Day is good fortune. Rain is ambiguous. Warmth is suspicious. Cold is expected. You hear elders argue about past years, who died, who prospered, what the sky looked like then. Christmas becomes a reference point for memory, a hinge around which years are measured. Animals share space with humans more closely now. Livestock are brought nearer to homes for warmth and protection. Their breathing joins yours in the dark. You depend on them utterly, and Christmas sharpens that awareness. Christ was born among animals, the story reminds you. That matters here, where survival is mutual. As you fall asleep, wrapped in wool and listening to the quiet shifting of bodies, human and animal alike, you feel the world holding its breath. Christmas has thinned the boundary between categories, sacred and ordinary, human and beast, past and future, and in that hush, surrounded by warmth that must last the night, you understand why people watch so closely now. When the world feels this alive, everything seems capable of speaking, if you're brave or foolish enough to listen. Travel during Christmas feels like a promise and a threat wrapped together. You want to visit family. You're excited to. Christmas pulls people toward one another with quiet insistence, and yet every step beyond the village edge reminds you why winter roads inspire so much fear. Snow hides ruts. Ice turns familiar paths treacherous. Distance expands in the cold. Here's a grounding historical fact. Medieval winter travel was genuinely dangerous, and records show sharp drops in long-distance movement between November and February. Roads were poorly maintained, bridges unreliable, and daylight scarce. Christmas travel happened anyway, because social obligation outweighed risk. Scholars debate whether this travel was motivated more by faith, family, or duty. From where you're standing, shivering before dawn, it feels like all three tangled together. You set out, early to maximize daylight. Breath hangs thick in the air. Every sound carries farther. Boots crunching, a cart creaking, a distant shout. You travel in groups when possible. Solitude in winter invites trouble. Wolves, thieves, exposure. No one agrees which is worse, but no one wants to find out alone. Hospitality laws matter more now. If night falls before you reach your destination, you knock on doors you'd normally pass by. Turning away a traveller at Christmas is considered dangerous, even cursed. There's a fringe belief that refusing shelter during the 12 days invites divine punishment. Or worse, visitation by something less merciful. Scholars argue whether such beliefs genuinely improved survival rates. Sitting by a stranger's fire, warming your hands, your grateful people believe them. Stories circulate of travellers who didn't make it. A cart found abandoned in a drift. Footprints leading nowhere. Christmas joy doesn't erase these tales, it sharpens them. Winter keeps receipts. You walk carefully, grateful for each mile completed. Reaching family feels like crossing a threshold. Doors open wider, fires burn brighter. The effort itself becomes part of the gift. You're praised not for what you brought, but for arriving at all. Christmas reunions here aren't sentimental. They're statistical victories. When sleep finally comes, it's deep and earned. Tomorrow the road waits again, but tonight you're indoors, alive, and surrounded by voices you know. In winter, that counts as celebration enough. As the season deepens, you start noticing something unsettling. The rules don't always apply the same way they usually do. Christmas softens justice, or at least it claims to. Punishments are delayed, sentences are reconsidered, mercy hovers in the air, uneven and unpredictable. Here's a solid historical fact. Medieval authorities sometimes granted Christmas pardons or suspended punishments during the 12 days. Prisoners might receive better food. Executions were occasionally postponed. Scholars debate how common this was, but court records confirm it happened often enough to be remembered. From where you stand, watching a man walk free for the season, it feels miraculous and fragile. Crime doesn't vanish, though. In fact, it can increase. Alcohol flows, crowds gather, tempers flare. Christmas brings opportunity along with mercy. You hear of thefts during feasts, fights after games, arguments turning violent. Winter magnifies mistakes. Justice's pause isn't a guarantee. It's a gamble. There's tension between law and theology here. Mercy is Christ-like. Order is necessary. Officials walk a narrow line, balancing compassion against chaos. Scholars still debate whether Christmas justice reflected sincere piety or practical crowd control. Watching guards look the other way one moment and crack down the next, you realise the line moves constantly. You also see how mercy can be performative. Public acts of forgiveness win favour. Lords gain loyalty by releasing debtors. Clergy demonstrate virtue by intervening on behalf of the condemned. Christmas turns justice into theatre. Who receives mercy, and who doesn't, is watched closely. As night falls, rumours spread faster than facts. Someone claims a murderer was freed. Someone else insists it's a lie. Anxiety hums beneath the celebration. Mercy feels good, but it also feels unsafe. When sleep comes, it's uneasy. Christmas has bent the world slightly out of shape, and you're not sure how smoothly it will snap back. By now, the knocking at the door feels inevitable. Christmas has a way of summoning it. The poor arrive not as a surprise, but as a reminder. Quiet, visible proof that celebration creates obligation. You hear them before you see them. Soft footsteps, hesitant voices, the pause that lingers just long enough to be polite. Here's a grounding historical fact. Medieval Christmas placed strong. Expectations on almsgiving. Church sermons, town customs, and household records all show spikes in charity during the 12 days. Food, clothing, fuel, and coins were distributed publicly and privately. Scholars debate whether this generosity represented genuine compassion or ritualized social control. Standing here with something warm in your hands, it feels like both mercy and measurement. Giving is watched. Who gives, how much, and how often becomes common knowledge. Charity isn't anonymous, it's performative. Refusing to give is risky. People remember. There's also a widespread belief that Christ himself might appear disguised as a beggar during Christmas. It's not symbolic. It's literal. You've heard the stories enough times to hesitate before closing a door. The poor themselves are not a single group. Some are neighbours fallen on hard times. Some are travellers stranded by winter. Others are familiar figures who circulate more visibly now, knowing Christmas loosens purses. You don't resent them, you fear becoming them. The boundary feels thin. There's an open scholarly debate here too. Did Christmas charity meaningfully alleviate poverty? Or did it merely ease consciences while leaving systems intact? From where you stand, the answer feels irrelevant in the moment. Hunger doesn't care about theory. Warmth is warm, even if temporary. As the fire burns low, you realise Christmas hasn't asked you to solve inequality. It's asked you to acknowledge it, publicly, repeatedly, and without excuses. As Christmas stretches toward its final days, the supernatural presses closer. It's no longer whispered, it's assumed. Ghosts, miracles, and divine interruptions feel not just possible, but expected. The season hums with stories that no one fully doubts, because winter has already taught you how thin life is. Christmas doesn't remove fear, it gives it shape. Here's a firm historical fact. Medieval Europe widely believed that the boundary between the living and the dead weakened during certain holy times, Christmas among them. Chronicles, sermons, and miracle collections describe apparitions, visions, and divine signs clustering around the 12 days. Scholars debate whether these accounts reflect genuine belief or narrative tradition used to reinforce moral lessons. Standing awake in the dark, listening to the house settle, you don't care which explanation is correct. You act as if the stories are true. The dead feel closer now. You think more often of those who didn't survive past winters. Names surface uninvited. Faces blur into dreams. There's a persistent belief that souls in purgatory receive special relief during Christmas if the living pray hard enough. This makes prayer urgent. You're not just praying for yourself, you're negotiating for others. Miracles circulate too. Someone's fever breaks unexpectedly. A child survives an illness everyone thought fatal. A cow recovers after being blessed. These stories spread quickly, growing with each telling. Scholars argue whether winter desperation amplifies coincidence into miracle. But in a world without certainty, hope doesn't require proof. Fear shadows the wonder. There are warnings about wandering spirits, about lights seen where no fire should be, about voices calling your name outside after dark. You don't answer. Everyone knows better. Christmas is powerful and power attracts attention, wanted and unwanted alike. Candles are kept burning longer now. Silence is avoided. Families cluster together after nightfall. Christmas has created warmth but also vigilance. You feel watched, not maliciously but expectantly. As sleep finally pulls you under, you understand something deeply medieval. Christmas is not safe because it is holy. It is dangerous because it is. The word plague never leaves the room, even when no one says it out loud. Christmas doesn't chase it away. If anything, the season sharpens your awareness of how close death always is. Winter is its ally. Crowded homes, shared cups, long nights indoors, everything that makes Christmas feel communal also makes it dangerous. Here's a grounding historical fact. Medieval Europe lived with recurring waves of disease long before the Black Death, and winter outbreaks were common. Chronicles mention illnesses flaring during cold months when people clustered together. Scholars debate whether Christmas gatherings worsened transmission or whether winter mortality would have risen regardless. From where you're standing, coughing into your sleeve, the distinction feels academic. Illness moves when it wants to. You notice it in small ways at first. Someone doesn't attend Mass. A familiar voice is missing from the singing. A house stays dark longer than it should. Christmas has taught you to count people, and now you're counting absences. Fear spreads faster than symptoms. Every ache becomes suspicious. Every fever feels prophetic. There's a fringe belief that falling ill during Christmas carries spiritual meaning. Some say it's a test. Others say it's a sign of favour, that suffering now mirrors Christ's humility. Still others whisper that sickness during holy days is punishment. Scholars argue that these interpretations helped people psychologically cope with random loss. Sitting beside someone sweating under blankets, you know the stories don't heal, but they give shape to helplessness. Care is practical and intimate. Herbs are boiled, prayers are murmured, candles are lit. Medicine is limited, but presence is not. Christmas doesn't promise recovery. It promises that no one should face the worst alone, that matters more than cure. Death, when it comes, is folded into the season without ceremony. Burials are quieter, quicker. Mourning overlaps with celebration in uncomfortable ways. You sing one night and grieve the next. Christmas doesn't pause for death, and death doesn't. Respect Christmas. As the days inch toward Epiphany, you feel the season tightening again. The softness won't last. The world will harden soon. Christmas hasn't defeated mortality. It's reminded you how closely joy and loss travel together. And as you lie awake listening to distant coughing echo through thin walls, you understand the truth medieval people lived with daily. Survival itself is the miracle Christmas offers, nothing more and nothing less. Children move differently through Christmas than adults do. You notice it now, in the way they slip between conversations, hover near doorways, and listen longer than anyone realizes. This season belongs to them in a way it doesn't fully belong to you, not because it's gentler, but because it's louder with lessons. Childhood here isn't a protected bubble. It's a short corridor, and Christmas accelerates the walk through it. Here's a solid historical fact to anchor you. In the Middle Ages, childhood was not universally recognized as a distinct sheltered phase of life. Children worked early, were disciplined like small adults, and faced the same diseases and dangers. Scholars debate how emotionally attached parents were, but letters, wills, and miracle stories suggest deep affection, tempered by constant risk of loss. Christmas amplifies this contradiction. Love and fear sit side by side. You watch children participate fully in the season. They attend long church services. They sing until their voices crack. They help prepare food and serve guests. Christmas doesn't excuse them from responsibility. It gives them visibility. Good behaviour is praised publicly. Bad behaviour is corrected just as publicly. The season teaches them where they stand. Stories aimed at children carry sharp edges. Saints rescue obedient youths. Disobedient ones vanish, suffer, or are redeemed only after punishment. St. Nicholas looms large here, not as a cuddly giver, but as a moral auditor. He watches. He remembers. Children believe this deeply, and so, quietly, do adults. Scholars argue whether fear-based instruction harmed or stabilized medieval communities. Watching a child freeze at the mention of a saint's name, you see how effective it was. There's also a fragile hope placed on children during Christmas. Births during the 12 days are watched closely. A healthy infant feels like a promise the world hasn't given up yet. At the same time, illness among children hits harder now. Winter already claims many. Losing a child during Christmas doesn't feel symbolic. It feels cruel, and yet it happens. You notice parents counting breaths at night, checking foreheads by firelight. Christmas doesn't soothe that vigilance, it intensifies it. Joy makes loss feel sharper, not softer. Scholars debate whether medieval parents emotionally distanced themselves to cope. Sitting in the dark, listening to a child breathe, you know distance isn't what you're feeling. As Epiphany approaches, children grow restless. They sense the season narrowing. Soon expectations will harden again. Work will return, discipline will tighten. Christmas has given them a glimpse of abundance and attention that won't last. And as you watch them fall asleep wherever exhaustion finds them, by the fire, on benches, against walls, you understand something quietly heartbreaking. Medieval Christmas didn't protect childhood. It illuminated it briefly, before the world resumed its demands. By now, you've learnt to watch the sky as closely as any scripture. Weather isn't small talk here, it's commentary. Every shift in wind, every change in temperature, every flake of snow feels like it's saying something directly to you. Christmas sharpens that instinct. The season insists the natural world is paying attention, and you should too. Here's a grounding historical fact. Medieval people interpreted weather through a theological lens. Sermons, chronicles, and farming manuals all link unusual weather to divine approval or warning, especially during holy seasons. Christmas weather in particular was believed to forecast the coming year. Scholars still debate whether these beliefs influenced agricultural planning or simply offered emotional structure in an unpredictable climate. Standing outside, breath stinging your lungs, it feels less like superstition and more like pattern-seeking survival. Snow on Christmas is widely considered a blessing. It promises moisture for crops and protection for seeds buried beneath frozen soil. You hear people speak of it with relief, even joy. Rain, however, is argued over. Some say it signals abundance, others mutter about rot and sickness. A warm Christmas unsettles everyone. Cold is expected. Warmth feels wrong, like a rule has been broken. You remember past years being measured this way. The year of the white Christmas, the year the frost never came. Memory sticks to weather, because weather decides everything. Christmas becomes a bookmark in collective memory, anchoring stories of loss and survival. Scholars argue that this made medieval times cyclical rather than linear. From where you stand, watching clouds crawl across the night sky, time feels layered instead, past years pressing close to the present. The wind carries meaning too. A north wind is clean, sharp, corrective. A southern wind is damp, suspect. These associations aren't random, they come from lived experience, but Christmas gives them moral weight. Nature isn't neutral during holy time, it participates. You adjust behaviour accordingly. Extra prayers if storms linger, gratitude if frost holds steady, caution if fog creeps in unexpectedly. Christmas doesn't make you feel in control of the weather, it makes you feel in conversation with it. As you head indoors, stamping snow from your boots or wiping rain from your cloak, you carry the sense that the world is watching you back. Christmas has made everything feel responsive, dangerously alive. And as you settle by the fire, listening to wind scrape against walls, you understand the medieval instinct clearly now. When survival depends on forces you cannot command, you learn to listen for meaning everywhere. As Christmas draws toward its end, the mood shifts again, quietly, almost politely. Laughter doesn't disappear, but it lowers its voice. The season has been generous, even indulgent, and now it begins asking something back. You feel it in your body first, the tiredness that no longer feels festive, the ache that reminds you rest has limits. Christmas has always been pointing here, toward endings, whether anyone admits it or not. Here's a grounding historical fact. Medieval Christmas theology was inseparable from mortality. Sermons during the season frequently linked Christ's birth directly to his eventual death, emphasizing incarnation not as comfort, but as sacrifice. Scholars debate whether this emphasis dampened joy or deepened it. Standing in the cold, listening to a priest remind you that the manger leads to the cross, it feels less like dampening and more like honesty. Birth and death are not opposites here. They're partners. This is when remembrance grows heavier. You think more often of those who died this year, especially those lost in winter. Christmas sharpens the memory. Chars, it insists on presence. Absence stands out painfully. Empty stools by the fire feel louder now. You speak names more often, sometimes without realizing it. The season doesn't allow forgetting, it requires accounting. There's also a belief, quiet but persistent, that Christmas prepares the soul for endings. Dying during the 12 days is feared less than dying alone in late winter. Some say the prayers of the season smooth the path. Others whisper that heaven listens more closely now. Scholars argue whether this belief offered comfort or simply softened terror. Sitting awake at night, you feel both. Births matter more too. A child born near the end of Christmas carries symbolic weight, hope compressed into flesh. The community watches closely, celebrating quietly, cautiously. Winter has taught everyone not to celebrate too soon. Joy here is careful, earned moment by moment. As Epiphany approaches, the calendar tightens. Christmas is no longer expanding, it's converging. You feel the days shortening in emotional space even as daylight barely changes. Soon the world will demand forward motion again. Work will return, debts will be counted, hierarchies will reassert themselves fully. And yet, Christmas hasn't been wasted. It has done its work. It has reminded you that endings are not interruptions, they are part of the pattern. Life continues not by ignoring death, but by carrying it alongside joy. As you lie down to sleep, you don't resist the heaviness anymore. Christmas has taught you how to hold it gently. The ending arrives without some ceremony. There's no final feast to mark it, no dramatic farewell. Christmas simply begins to loosen its grip, one expectation at a time. You wake up and realise the day feels ordinary again. Not fully, something lingers, but the pressure has shifted. The season that bent rules and softened edges is preparing to release you back into the harder shape of the year. Here's a grounding historical fact. In the Middle Ages, Epiphany, January the 6th, marked the formal close of the Christmas season. It commemorated the visit of the Magi, but practically it functioned as a reset. Courts reopened, Labour obligations resumed. Festivities ended abruptly in many places. Scholars debate whether this sudden return to normalcy was psychologically jarring or reassuring. Standing in the cold morning air, tools back in your hands, it feels like both. Relief and loss arrive together. Decorations come down quietly, greenery dries and crumbles. Candles are saved, not wasted. Food stores are recounted with sharpo eyes. The abundance you enjoyed is already fading into memory, and winter still has weeks, months to go. Christmas didn't end winter, it only interrupted it. There's a curious belief that whatever you do on Epiphany sets the tone for the coming year. Work carefully. Speak kindly, don't argue if you can avoid it. Scholars argue whether this belief functioned as moral encouragement or superstition. You don't analyse it. You behave cautiously, just in case. After a season that proved how thin the world can feel, you're not eager to tempt it. Social roles snap back into place. The Lord of Misrule disappears. Servants resume deference. Debts resurface. Jokes that were safe a few days ago would now carry consequences. No one complains aloud. Christmas was never meant to last. Its power comes from being temporary. You notice exhaustion settling in, not the cosy kind, but the deep fatigue that follows emotional intensity. Christmas asked a lot of you. Generosity, vigilance, joy, mourning, restraint. Letting it go hurts more than you expected. Scholars sometimes describe medieval life as emotionally restrained. Living through Christmas proves how wrong that is. Emotion wasn't absent, it was concentrated. As night falls, the village grows quieter. Songs stop, laughter thins, fires burn lower. You feel the return of discipline, familiar and heavy, but something remains. Christmas has shifted how you carry winter. You're not warmer, you're not safer, but you're steadier. And as you close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will look much like yesterday before Christmas, you realise the season has done exactly what it was meant to do. It didn't change your world. It prepared you to endure it. Now that Christmas has fully loosened its hold, you finally have the space to understand what it actually was. Not a fantasy, not an escape, not even happiness in the way you might define it now. Medieval Christmas was a tool, carefully shaped by faith, fear, hunger, memory and weather, to get you through the most dangerous stretch of the year with your humanity mostly intact. Here's a final grounding historical fact to settle into. Medieval writers and theologians consistently framed Christmas not as an endpoint, but as reinforcement. Sermons emphasized endurance, community obligation, and moral recalibration. Scholars debate whether this made Christmas emotionally restrained compared to modern celebrations, or whether it made it deeper and heavier. Standing here, looking back on the season, you know the answer depends on what you think joy is for. Christmas didn't pretend winter was kind. It didn't deny death, poverty, or exhaustion. Instead, it acknowledged all of it openly, and then insisted you keep going anyway. The season redistributed food just enough to prevent collapse. It redistributed mercy just enough to prevent rebellion. It redistributed joy just enough to remind people why survival mattered. That balance wasn't accidental. It was learned, refined, and fiercely protected. The quirky beliefs, the talking animals, the watching saints, the thin nights, weren't childish nonsense. They were ways of explaining uncertainty in a world that offered no guarantees. Scholars still argue whether these beliefs represented ignorance or imaginative resilience. Living among them, you understand, they were neither. They were maps drawn in the dark. Open debates never resolved themselves neatly. Was Christmas about charity or control, faith or folklore, relief or pressure? The answer was always yes. Medieval life didn't demand consistency. It demanded function. Christmas functioned. That's why it lasted. You feel its absence now. The world is quieter, harsher, more linear, but you're carrying something forward. A memory of shared warmth. A memory of voices raised together. A memory of having enough, briefly. That memory matters more than decoration ever could. As winter stretches ahead, you don't feel optimistic, but you feel prepared. Christmas didn't save you. It reminded you how to endure alongside others, how to balance fear with ritual, how to let joy exist without trusting it to stay. And as you finally let your breathing slow, wrapped in the afterglow of a season that asked everything and promised little, you drift towards sleep with the most medieval truth of all, settled gently in your mind. Christmas wasn't meant to make you comfortable, it was meant to keep you alive.